I'm going to introduce our first speakers. They're going to discuss the changing face of the donor. First, we have Dan Layman, President and CEO of the Community Foundation of the Central Blue Ridge. Dan has been the Community Foundation of the Central Blue Ridge. He's been with them since March of 2013 as their President and CEO. He specializes in helping individuals and companies accomplish their charitable objectives and seeks to ensure that they are satisfied with their choices. Dan graduated in 1988 from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and since then has dedicated his career to helping others through fundraising and planned giving. He and his wife, Pamela Fox, live in Stanton, Virginia. Next, we'll have Danielle Ellis, Senior Program Manager, Path Resources Center, Center for Not-for-Profit Excellence. Danielle joined CNE in 2020 after her most recent position as the Executive Director of the Fauquier Family Services Shelter. As Path Resource Center Manager, she works with nonprofits in the northern Culpeper, Fauquier, and Rappahannock area to help them reach their full mission potential. Danielle brings over 20 years of management experience with a focus in human resources as both an Army officer and senior federal civil service employee with the Department of Defense. She received a BA in Communications from St. Augustine's University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and is a member of the Leadership Fauquier's class of 2019. She enjoys reading, writing, and spending time outdoors, whether it's at the beach, woods, or mountains. She loves them all. Okay, Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, and good morning, everyone. My partner in this part of the presentation, Danielle, was having some technical issues and hopefully will be joining us shortly. But I believe Holly is going to bring up our presentation on screen. Is that right, Holly?
Sorry, Dan. I changed. Do you have the presentation up?
I do not. Danielle has the presentation.
Okay, Danielle's on.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Now she may be joining from her phone.
Okay, give me just a second and I will have that up.
I have it, Holly.
Okay, if you want to pull it up, Alexa, that would be great.
Very good. Well, while that is being prepared for the screen, just want to note that Danielle and I are pleased to help kick things off this morning. The changing demographics of donors pose continual opportunities as well as challenges for the nonprofit. Probably far too many for us to discuss in 50 minutes. Therefore, Danielle and I will focus on two demographic changes, specifically new generations of donors and donors of color. And we're going to flow through this in a more conversational way. And so let me just see if Danielle successfully made it onto the call. Are you there, Danielle?
She seems to have dropped off now.
All right, so she may be still working through those issues. So I will, fortunately, I have all of our notes and can work my way through it on her behalf too. So one of the first things I wanted to address is what trends we're observing. And the first trend concerns our long-time donors. In light of the pandemic, many older adults have been rushing to refresh their estate plans.
Sorry, Dan, hang on just a second. Alexa, you got the wrong screen showing. Your team screen is showing.
Okay. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you could just play the slideshow, then.
Perfect. So once you put that in play mode, and you can go ahead and
Yeah.
advance to the next slide. And the next one.
What is happening?
It's not moving, Alexa.
Okay.
It's still like in the PowerPoint. It's not like in the play motion.
Under slideshow, you should be able to see play from the beginning.
It popped up on my secondary screen.
Okay.
There we go.
Do you see the? There you go. Perfect.
There, go ahead and advance that to the next slide, please.
Is it advancing on your end? There you go.
There we are. All right. So I was just beginning to introduce some of the trends that we're seeing. One in particular, as I noted, pertains to our longtime donors. And in light of the pandemic, many of them have been revisiting their estate plans. And lately, there has just been a rush amongst our own donors of coming in to revisit those plans. And this includes rethinking their charitable giving and thinking a bit more strategically about the welfare of our community as a whole, and less about simply earmarking gifts to their favorite nonprofit organizations. More specific to our topic today, it goes without saying, pandemic has accelerated our need to appeal to a younger audience. Our traditional volunteers and donors, by and large, older adults and retirees, understandably needed to cut back or simply discontinue their service hours. Many probably won't return to us. Just as employers across the country are struggling to hire, nonprofit organizations are working quickly to replace their longtime volunteers with a combination of staff and younger volunteers who approach this work very differently. And finally, we all need to be making changes to engage the next generation of donors. We can't rely upon tracking them by simply relying on our traditional practices and expecting the same results. However, there are some things that give me much encouragement about the next generation of donors. Each new generation of donor has their own perspective, and we won't have time today to get into all of the subtle differences between them. So I'll speak to this in general terms. First, though, I think it's important that we're mindful of what they've experienced while coming of age. We often think about the technological advances that have been part of their lives since birth. However, they also grew up witnessing horrific violence in their personal spaces, such as school shootings and teen suicide. And their generations will also be dealing increasingly with worldwide challenges, such as global warming. As a result, they're ready to engage in difficult conversations on topics that would previously have been avoided, such as mental health, and they want to make a meaningful difference. And I take a lot of encouragement from that. Younger generations are thankfully very willing to give their time and resources, much more so than my generation, the baby boomers, which has been the least charitable generation on record. And the younger generations are also willing to engage their family and their network of friends and colleagues in the charitable causes that are important to them, which opens the doors for peer-to-peer fundraising and other forms of engagement. So there's a number of ways in which we as nonprofit leaders should begin considering how we adjust our approach. And we need to begin by understanding and embracing how the younger generations make decisions regarding the use of their time and resources. And this would be a good time to introduce our first poll, if that could be brought up on screen.
Okay.
There we are. So What percentage of millennials made a financial gift to at least one nonprofit organization last year?
Okay, we'll let the votes come in. I'll give it about 30 seconds and see where we're at.
All right. And hopefully we'll see the result of that on screen.
Yes, I'll share that. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds to get a few more folks in on this poll. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and then I will share the results.
There we are. So the participants today, it looks like gravitating to, pardon me, 53% of millennials having made at least one gift to nonprofit organizations last year. The actual percentage, which ranked the lowest here, is actually 84%. And that percentage offers me much encouragement and I think something positive upon which we can all begin building. So thank you for launching that poll for me. So one of the things driving that percentage is that millennials and younger generations have a strong social conscience and they prefer to support real change over simply maintaining the status quo. This has real implications for how we plan and talk about the work of our organizations. For example, they appreciate the need to house and feed the homeless, and they will readily give their time and money to help in a moment of crisis. To keep them connected to that mission, however, they want to know more about the next step. How are you helping that homeless individual or family achieve long-term stability? And how could their continued time or donations serve that goal? The younger generations also prefer to blend their charitable service and their social time with friends. This is one of the ways in which they enjoy fulfilling two personal goals simultaneously, using their time efficiently, and opens the door for nonprofit organizations to engage them in peer-to-peer fundraising and recruiting volunteers on your behalf. If you can successfully get a core group of young donors and volunteers on your side, you can rely upon them to begin bringing other people to the table to participate in the activities of your organization together. Likewise, those with children are welcoming opportunities through which they can engage as a family and instill a social conscience in their children. So whenever it is possible to create activities that are family friendly, I think you'll stand a better chance of engaging those young families. They also prefer short-term projects with clear outcomes versus indefinite time and giving commitments. Consequently, they're willing to quickly move from one project to the next and one organization to the next. For example, you'll likely find them unwilling to volunteer for an ongoing Meals on Wheels assignment, even if that's only for one day each week. However, they'll be more inclined to adopt a single week or even a month and take charge of filling the individual route assignments with their family, friends, and colleagues. The younger generations are also very entrepreneurial and have a high tolerance for trying new things, knowing that they may fail. We can expect them to push us out of our comfort zones. Many of you may have already experienced that. And our default response shouldn't be to immediately push back. We need to think through the merits of their ideas, give them room to test those ideas, and to do that within reason, of course, considering our budgets and our limited time. These generations also blur the line between for-profit and nonprofit sectors. Keep in mind that this generation grew up with the adoption of the benefit corporation, socially responsible investing, and impact investing. their quest for social change flows relatively seamlessly between the sectors. Therefore, whichever sector seems to them to be doing a better job of innovating and achieving the change that they're looking for is most likely to capture their time and their resources. And here is something that has probably frustrated many a nonprofit leader. They are quickly to express their interest, but may not fully commit until the last moment. And I'm sure that everyone here has already experienced their tendency to either not RSVP, but show up nonetheless, or to RSVP and not show up. That trend, from what I've seen, is not going away. So we all need to hedge our bets in terms of numbers and to practice patience. And finally, they view all of their personal assets, including their time, money, their talents, their personal networks, as equal. And our acknowledgement of those gifts need to reflect that value. So what are some of the steps that nonprofit leaders can begin taking right now? For our longtime donors and volunteers, we need to be talking to them right now about planned giving. We also need to have a plan for how estate gifts can transform our organization's community impact. This may mean directing estate gifts to a specific strategic expenditure, the launch of a new program, or simply an endowment for the long-term financial stability of our organization. I recommend that we also begin incorporating elements of the gig economy into our engagement strategy. This may take the form of many short-term but impactful projects that offer us and them a series of quick victories. This practice may consume more time and effort, but should develop relationships that can stand the test of time. We need to adopt a more entrepreneurial mindset to how we fulfill our nonprofit missions. This includes a willingness to allow younger volunteers and donors to push us out of our comfort zones to try new things within limits, of course. One thing that I hear often, and I will push back on, is the notion that technology, that newly designed app, can be the solution that solves all problems. I've seen those attempted, but our work really relies upon that interpersonal connections with the people who we are serving. But at the same time, we also need to educate while we engage with these generations. We can't expect them to be aware of the regulations that we need to follow or the day-to-day realities of families living in poverty. So we need to help temper their ideas with information while not dismissing their ideas outright. One big issue that we need to tackle is reimagining board service. The days of expecting our supporters to readily commit to 6 to 8 years of service, in my opinion, are numbered. The future of nonprofit boards has yet to be defined, but may take the shape of a much smaller governance structure focused primarily on fulfilling the legal responsibilities of a board. And that structure may then be complemented by many short-term task or project-oriented ad hoc committees or groups populated by non-board members. And those short-term engagements could prove to be a great way to identify and cultivate our future board members. And my final recommendation is to embrace a higher level of uncertainty, which we can keep to a manageable level if we commit to listening to and evolving with each new generation. And before we transition topics, and I'm glad to see we have Danielle on screen now, I believe that our friends at Brown Edwards have another poll to launch.
Okay, this one's going to be an attendance poll. And don't worry, this is, I had to jump down and grab another poll. So this is not really number 3, this is number 2. Don't feel like you've missed one. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and I won't share the results because it's just an attendance poll. Hopefully everybody said they're in attendance.
And so now that we have Danielle with us, good to see you. Is your audio working?
Good morning. I certainly hope so. It's been a long technical journey to get here this morning.
Well, you're coming through loud and clear, so glad to have you just in time. So why don't we switch gears and focus on the motivations and giving practices of diverse populations. So Danielle, what motivates people of color in the U.S. to give?
Thanks, Dan. You know, it was exciting to think about this topic and do the research, you know, particularly obviously as an African-American woman, so much of the research resonated with me and my family and how we give. And there are, you know, the major motivations that drive donors of color. Number one is their faith. It's not typically seen as a philanthropic endeavor, but many donors of color link their religious beliefs and have deep roots in those traditions around how they look at their resources and really prioritize giving through those faith-based community efforts. I thought about a story. I was in the military early in my career, and as a newly minted lieutenant, I was trying to be very financially astute and met with a financial planner, and he was going to help me do some investing. And he used the term, well, you're a heavy tither. You know, we might want to look at that line item in your budget. And I thought, what does that mean? You know, it's a minimum 10%. And that just was ingrained in me from a very young age, and just a whole part of how I chose to expand my resources in giving back into the community. The second motivation is self-help. It's seen as this economic weapon to fight against racial oppression of the donors' racial or ethnic groups. Again, making it personal, I think it really comes down to debunking the stereotypes around maybe, you know, the welfare mother that was promoted in the 80s, or, you know, this need to rely heavily on, you know, other systems or government entities. Many, specifically in the African American community, really want to take pride in taking care of their own, and that holds true across other communities of color, you know, particularly Hispanic, as well as our Asian populations here in the US. The third motivation is reciprocity. You know, this idea that for many years, people of color have often felt excluded from mainstream culture, and minority communities develop their own way of, you know, economic reciprocity with one another. I can even think about my grandmother, you know, having a day job and a side job and a weekend job, you know, bartering and trading, taking in laundry for other goods or services from others in the community to just have that thriving community within our own population. And number four, to level the playing field. Donors of color want to provide better pathways for the younger generation, you know, really wholeheartedly believing in the power of education and striving for excellence, striving to be, you know, productive members of society, and heavily invest in those types of endeavors, whether it's after school programs, all the way up to you know, scholarship opportunities. Those are kind of the trends that come out around the giving of donors of color and their motivations for giving.
So I can appreciate that a lack of trust and confidence may explain why many donors of color choose to self-organize to help each other in more efficient ways. How does this influence where donors of color give?
Thanks, Dan. You know, again, number one, they're going to give through their houses of worship. It could be their own house of worship, or really many donors of color just align with faith traditional giving streams, whether it's their own personal church or not. They're going to really give heavily in that sector. Number two is going to be your universities and other education related opportunities, particularly with Black and Asian groups. We really prioritize education as a way ahead, a way of securing a future. I'm a product of a historically Black college and university, and it's just a whole culture that is around the HBCUs in terms of giving back to the community, not just that this is your education, but that you've become part of, you know, this legacy and what those colleges and universities were born out of is really something that is instilled in the students. Again, that it's not just about your degree, but it's about continuing this legacy of excellence and you know, how we're going to show up in the community and continue to pour back into those universities for those coming behind us. Number three, not surprisingly, are civil rights organizations and arts organizations. Donors of color want to give to those organizations that are counteracting racism directed towards their ethnic groups. And we're seeing kind of even in that, I'll speak specifically around the Black Lives Matter movement and that tension there with the NAACP. You know, there is just this new generation and energy coming up through the Black Lives Matter movement, but still this reverence and honor and respect for the many years of what the NAACP represents. And again, that merging and convergence with the AAPI communities earlier this year, there is just this synergy around respecting what was, embracing what is new, and even communities of color coming together when there is an intersectionality around how we are being treated and perceived, that we pool those resources, pool our energy to get a greater magnification of the issues and efforts that we are trying to rectify and bring attention to. And finally, it's, you know, ethnic financial institutions. There is, you know, really this investment in wanting to support institutions that are providing capital to diverse populations, especially among Hispanic donors. They are, you know, looking at in entrepreneurial endeavors and really wanting to make that investment into organizations that are investing into their population.
Okay. And the newest nonprofit in our organization is preparing to provide micro grants to people of color as they're working their way up. So what specific tools and techniques do donors of color use to enhance their giving?
So throughout the many reports I researched for this, there was just a definite trend and a thread that went through. It's really about giving through personal connections and small groups. Donors of color really place a high value on knowing where their money is and having a confidence about how those dollars are going to be spent. You know, there is just this historic distrust of mainstream philanthropic institutions. And so it really is important that as nonprofits or funders or whomever want to connect with these organizations to really plug in and understand who the leaders are and get some, you know, familiar community faces in the conversation, because I think that will drive the engagement and investment from the donors of color. Another kind of unique thing is giving circles, you know, really creating different groups, whether it's men's groups or certain community groups, and there's like a monthly giving goal that's there. These giving circles are able to provide immediate support right at the ground level. you know, a need arises, they engage that circle, engage that telephone tree or whatever it is, and funds are immediately available to meet the immediate need in the community. And much like our, you know, millennial generation, we find that our donors of color utilize online media, you know, social media, online platforms, and crowdfunding. It is, again, a way to connect with a person or a cause that is really hitting home for them, and this immediate connection and able to give. Again, it's most often in crisis or emergency scenarios. So at this time, if we could launch our poll for this section of our talk, that would be great.
Okay, I'm gonna pull that up now. Okay, so our next poll is what percentage of donor of color donate through crowdfunding sites each year? We've got some votes coming in, so I will give it just a few more seconds to get to our typical percentage we seem to be getting this morning. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. And I will say really quickly, I don't think I said earlier, if you do have any issues answering polls, you're welcome just to use your question panel to let me know. Okay, I'm going to share the results.
All right, so we were almost there, almost there. The answer to this question is 34%. 34% of donors of color donated through crowdfunding sites as of the latest donor of color report that was out as of 2020. So we'll see if that increases over the coming years.
Well, this is all great information, Danielle. Are there other trends that you've identified in the philanthropic patterns of donors of color?
Absolutely. You know, again, thinking historically around what is philanthropy, and many times donors of color don't really identify or see themselves in a philanthropic, through a philanthropic lens. But some of the different things that have been identified are, you know, donors of color are engaged in multiple forms of generosity. A couple of things I'll pull out. For example, 53% of donors of color volunteered in a given year. 34% donate blood. 70% donate goods. Again, as our poll stated, 34% donors of color reported giving through crowdfunding sites. And there's a growing awareness that our Asian and African Americans are more likely to give to racial and social justice causes as compared with their white counterparts. Again, I think there's an opportunity for nonprofits to really amplify and highlight the work they may be doing in those arenas in their community to connect with those donors of color. You know, and then the informal giving. I thought this was neat. Analysis show that white donors across all racial, across all racial and ethnic groups reported they gave directly to help people they know. African Americans had a higher tendency than others to give money to strangers directly. And so I know as you're thinking about your storytelling, thinking about, you know, as nonprofits think about how to capture different ways of engaging with donors, that storytelling becomes very important, I think, to engage donors of color beyond maybe your facts and figures, and really help them identify with where the work is making the most impact on the person level. That is one of those bridges, I think, that you can use to really reach donors of color. They're very interested in the specific impact on people and groups and individuals. And finally, some key takeaways, for nonprofits to attract diverse donors. It really is about deepening the awareness and engagement with the economic groups, the changing ethnic identity in your community, getting engaged, finding out what motivates them and where they're already giving, and seeing where there is alignment with your mission and some of those causes that donors of color are already sowing into. It's also about understanding and recognizing the distinct histories, resources, and challenges that shape the giving of donors of color in their communities. It's important to understand between the different ethnic groups, and what kind of nuances may be there as you're seeking to engage in those groups. And a lot of times it's very specific history in the community. It's not going to be a cookie cutter kind of application that you can apply. You really are going to need to engage on the ground level and understand the nuances in your community and that history. And know that donors of color many times have different, leaders. They are serving as intermediaries. Find out who are those trusted leaders in those communities, and really connect with them, and they can help you bridge that gap, because many times that's going to be the way in. It's that person that they trust, that they already know, that's already working in the community, rather than the appearance of an outsider trying to come in and tell us what we need, or where we should be giving. And most importantly, I would say really embracing what that cultural and social capital is that donors of color bring to the table. It may not be readily apparent, but taking some time to understand what it might do for you, connecting in different areas of your mission, having this invaluable social capital when you're connecting with diverse donors can really make the difference in, depending on the life cycle of your nonprofit, really make the difference in your programming, in your reach, in your sustainability, and reaching new heights and new goals that you might have. There are many opportunities, I think, to think differently about philanthropy and engaging with the non-traditional people that we think of when we think of donors, when we think of high impactful people that we want to bring into our organizations, bring into just into our circle, into the people that we can rely on to be ambassadors for us, to begin to think about that differently. And it will require to come out of your comfort zone a little bit, but I think having just an awareness of what the opportunities are is the first step. And so at this time, I just want to thank you all so much for this opportunity. And again, pardon my late arrival. I was so early, and then technology tried to derail me this morning. I also would like to, on behalf of the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, thank Brown Edwards for their sponsorship of our upcoming Philanthropy Day next week. We are so grateful always for the support of businesses in the community, for the work that CNE is doing for our nonprofits across the state of Virginia. And I'll turn it back over to Dan.
Great. Well, thank you, Danielle. And this was a great opportunity to at least dip our toes into these two topics. That there is a great deal of research that is coming forth, and so I would encourage everyone to pay close attention to it. And I think one of the themes that you heard from both of us is that we need to be prepared and comfortable coming out of our comfort zones, and to welcome that. There's a lot of great work to be done, and we all have an opportunity to define what this looks like in the future. So I think either one of us would be happy to answer any questions that may have come up while we were presenting.
Okay, I'm going to look for any questions. If anyone has any questions, please, again, just enter those questions into your question option on your panel. And then also, if you prefer to ask a question, you can raise your hand, and I'm looking for those now. We did have one person earlier ask about if it would be possible to get any sources or other information regarding the data that you basically reported related to donors of color and millennials. If you have any of those sources that you would be willing to pass along, we had someone that would be interested in that as well.
Sure, I can provide some of that to Brown Edwards if there's going to be some follow-up from the symposium.
Yes, we will have a follow-up email with materials and everything in it, so that would be wonderful. I am not seeing any other questions coming through at this point.
So Holly, let me just jump in there a minute. Dan and Danielle, thank you so much for joining us and your presentation. I just sort of had a follow-up question. It sounds like in today's world, when you're out looking for donors, you're going to have to be more strategic about groups that you want the donations to come from. Instead of the world where in the past you just sort of ran a campaign based on any type of donor. Now it seems like we're strategizing towards either a younger donor or a donor of color. Is that what you're seeing more in the not-for-profit world? And any tips there for campaigns and how to strategize at that level as opposed to just a global fundraising campaign?
Sure, I have some to suggest, but Danielle, if you have anything you want to jump in, I'll let you go first.
Sure thing. I would say I think we have to just be a little nimble and maintain, some of our tried and true campaign, the way we've done fundraising. However, I think as we are beginning to put diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of front and center within the nonprofit sector, it has caused us to have that filter across many of the things that we do. I think Dan mentioned earlier, looking at board service, looking at fundraising, it's just one other aspect of thinking a bit differently when we want to have diverse perspectives in our organizations, period. So in terms of fundraising, again, I just think it goes in line with any other area that we want to be flexible and nimble around going into, new seasons of doing things a little differently, particularly as your community may be changing demographics. It will be important to understand those nuances. I worked with an organization recently who they have a large Latino population coming in and growing in their community, and they just have not been able to crack the code about how to engage. And it took them to connect the dots around the church. And so they had a pastor that was on their board that said, well, let's try this. I'm going to reach out to the other faith leader of a couple of this, larger Latino churches. But at the end result, it resulted in, some board service opportunity. It resulted in, just some baby steps, knowing that it's not going to be overnight. When they initially went in, they went in looking to how they could help. And the community was kind of like, we're okay, we're helping ourselves. But they're making these tiny steps, these inroads into connecting with that community because it's such a growing population right there where they're serving already. So it was great to see that their efforts resulted at least in board member, and then it will go, I think, into those other areas of the mission and the organization. So I've talked a long time, Dan. I'll pop it over to you.
This is the time of year when most nonprofits are thinking about their end of year giving campaign, and they may be accustomed to their supporters waiting for this time of year when they make their one financial commitment to your organization. The end of year campaign is not going to be successful with younger generations. The response rate will likely be relatively low, but that generation is also willing to give to you multiple times every year. There's just simply needs to be a sense of urgency and a sense of purpose around why they're giving. And I think colleges and universities were first out of the gate on this. They knew how much they had budgeted for the year in unrestricted giving. They know they have an endless list of capital projects on campus with improvements. They would marry those two and announce largely via social media that, for instance, the rec room in the Smith dormitory is going to be converted into a new remote learning lab. We need to raise $30,000 this week. And so it had something that they could identify with and see in their minds. It had a near-term goal and an achievable goal. And they would run multiple campaigns like that throughout the year and achieve a great deal of success.
Great.
And Dan, piggybacking on that, you made me think about, also, I think sometimes lowering the threshold of, where donors can enter in. Just thinking of your example, having those, $5 days or, whatever it is to kind of engage, you would just be surprised at how much you can bring in through that very low threshold of giving. Of course, we don't want to let go of our long-term, higher end, high wealth donors, but I think providing that lower barrier of entry to be able to be a part of some, tangible outcome is huge, even in donors of color as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And of course, the way we thank those donors needs to be very personal.
Yes.
Not just a form letter.
Yes.
So, celebrate those successes online with them.